we're having some recent successes, and what we need to continue to be thinking about to make sure that we not only stay within that top 5, but try to work our way up towards that #1 spot. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. I think they will do better at introducing themselves than I will. So, but a thank you to our panelists and to our moderator. We all have a lot going on these days, and we certainly appreciate them giving a little bit of their time and perspective to us. So thank you again, all of you, for agreeing to join us here. And we look forward to a great discussion. So I'll turn it over to Kevin to get us started with some intros, and then we'll head right into the discussion.
All right. Well, thank you, Greg. So as Greg mentioned, Kevin Brandenburg. I am Senior Vice President, Head of Corporate Services, and Chief Procurement Officer for ParExcel, a leading global CRO provider in the life sciences arena, doing research for experimental drugs and devices on behalf of our pharmaceutical customers. Prior to coming to ParExcel, I headed up real estate and procurement for Syneos Health, another research organization in the life sciences space. And then prior to that, I was the head of real estate for MetLife and took care of their global operations around the world. Very pleased to be here to present today and be a part of the panel. And now I'll hand it over to Doug.
Great, thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Greg, and everybody too for the invitation to participate. So I'm Doug Kraft. I'm the site head and general manager for Icogen. We're a biotech company in the park. We've been in this space, in this area, for about 30 years as an organization. I've been with the company a little around 20. And over that period of time, we've been a private biotech company, publicly traded. We were part of Pfizer following an acquisition for a number of years, and then ultimately spun back out, and now we're part of Ligand Pharmaceuticals. So the company's remained vibrant in the drug discovery space over that period of time. I think we have a very specialized skill set and talent pool, which we can talk about a bit later. But world-class talent and fade certain areas of ion channel drug discovery on the preclinical side. So my background is all in basically biotech and pharma. Prior to Icogen, I was with Boehringer Ingelheim and one of the Vertex companies out in San Diego. So it's a pleasure to be here. And Greg, I don't remember who's next. I apologize.
I think we're going to go with Michael and then Neil.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Michael Myers. I'm the Senior Financial Planning and Analysis Director at Grail. I've been at Grail for 4 years since its founding. You're probably wondering why a finance person's here representing instead of facilities, but I led facilities. As any startup, you kind of wear a few hats. So I led facilities for 2.5 years and just recently handed it off to a Senior Director of Facilities, but I continue to lead our expansion into RTP. And so I'm actually here in RTP this week and bouncing back and forth to get this project through. Before Grail, I worked at Illumina for 2 years, and Illumina created Grail. So when the company was formed, I transitioned over. And before Illumina, I spent 2 years in the wine business in Napa, and then 15 years before that in Hewlett-Packard, the printer business in Boise, Idaho. I'm not sure who to hand it off to next either. Sorry.
I think I'm up. The wine business sounds way more fun than what we're talking about today. I'm Neil Sharon. Know a lot of you folks. The Senior Director of Portfolio Leasing for Longfellow. So I oversee all leasing activity across our national portfolio. We have about 5 million square feet between Raleigh, Durham market, Boston, San Francisco, San Diego, Palo Alto, and manage all of our leasing teams and work with our asset management teams on transacting on deals, and then also have the opportunity to work with our acquisitions team as we seek new opportunities in all those markets. So glad to be here today.
Well, I'm Ryan Combs, and I'm going to moderate today. I appreciate being invited to participate. We've got an excellent group of panelists. I'm really excited to ask some questions of all of them. I run the Research Triangle Regional Partnership. We're a 12-county regional economic development organization, and I really have a great job. My job is to go out and sell this region to the rest of the world every day, and so I'm really proud of our region, especially what we're doing in life sciences. And that's what our conversation is going to be based around today, is the growth and future of the life sciences here in the Triangle. I wanted to give you some statistics before we start that everyone could be proud of. You know, overall, our region has grown by 18% over the last 10 years. We're now home to 2.28 million of North Carolina's 10.5 million residents, and we're projected to grow at another 17% over the next 10 years. Our life science sector alone has grown by 25% in just the last 3 years. We now are home to 500 life science companies who are employing over 16,000 people, and that sector contributes $9.8 billion to our regional economy every year. 64% of our STEM graduates from our universities are now staying here to work and are fueling the life science pipeline. We have the 4th highest concentration of PhDs in the country. We have 7 of the top 10 global CROs. They're either headquartered or have major operations here. And we can proudly boast we have the highest concentration of CROs in the world. We also currently are doing around 3,000 active clinical trials going on right now, including groundbreaking work around COVID. And Durham and Chapel Hill recently ranked the #1 area for NIH funding per capita. So there's a lot of great things to be excited about, and we'll talk more with our group today on that. I do want to say one thing. If you'd like to submit a question in the chat box, please do so as we go along. So let's get right into it. And Neil, since you're up, I'll start with you. As the senior director with Longfellow, can you talk a little bit about the life sciences landscape here in the Triangle, and what do you believe has contributed to our region's incredible growth over the last few years?
Yeah. So I think one of the start off by saying that one of the changes that I've seen over the last few years, 10 years or so, is a shift from a lot of owner-occupied space to investor-owned space. So our market's grown from an investor standpoint. So JLL has us at about 8.3 million square feet of lab space. We have some internal tracking that we do for actual lab space. That's, we track somewhere around 6 million feet, but 6 to 8 million feet, if we go off those numbers, and our market is usually around 8 to 9% vacant. Right now we're about 12.5% vacant, mainly due to some developers like Longfellow and ARE and TPG buying some vacancy and converting buildings. So we've seen a little bit of an uptick in vacancy, but I don't think that's an indication of any kind of, any kind of stress in the market. I think it's a matter of, folks wanting to continue to add more space to the inventory and continue to grow our market. Rates are continuing to increase, and we were doing, 7, 8 years ago, we were doing deals at $21 a foot. Now we're doing deals at, $30 to $35 a foot for very similar space in the RTP, market. So rates have grown. I think part of the reason rates have grown is because there's been an influx of a lot of really, focused investors in life science. So before, and Doug, maybe you can even speak to this because you've been leasing space for a long time in the RTP. There weren't a lot of folks who would co-invest with tenants in their build out. So you'd get a cheap lease rate, but then you'd have to, use your own money to build your space out. And now there's folks like Longfellow and some of the other groups that I mentioned, and some that that we'll talk more about, and as we get on the questions here. Who are coming in and co-investing in the space, and they're charging larger rental rates. So I think the market has reacted well to that change. And I think tenants are happy to have the landlord, bear some of the cost of the build outs. A lot of tenants still co-invest in their space, so they're still, putting a lot of skin in the game. But I think the market's reacted well to that pricing change. And so we've seen a pretty large increase in the rental rate and economics of the market. With that being said, we're still substantially cheaper than other markets, and I'm sure Michael can speak to that with his national perspective and leasing space in Menlo Park and other places. We're still a pretty large discount. In San Francisco, we own space in kind of mid-peninsula in Palo Alto, and we're doing deals at $60 to $70 a foot. In Boston, rates can get over $100 a foot. And so when you think about, still being able to lease, quality space that is in a great location, in the RTP for $35 a foot, it still feels like a pretty healthy place to be in our market.
Great. And I'll call on Doug next. Neil brought him up. Doug, I'd love for you to add on any of your thoughts on why you think the Triangle has really been like a 25% growth rate over the last 3 years, what we're doing right. And then I also wanted to ask you, as someone, as he indicated, you've been here for a while, you've seen Icogen grow from a small company to what it is today. What are some of the reasons that have led to your company's success here in the Triangle?
Sure. Thanks, Ryan. I'll speak to Neil's point to start with. We've been in the park, as I mentioned in the intro, about probably 20. I've been here about 20 plus years, but 30 plus. So multiple property owners. We're working with Longfellow now, which has been great. And I think you're absolutely right. The ability to co-finance and giving that flexibility in terms of expansion. And I don't think it should be undersold either that having a few groups like Longfellow, ARE, others that really understand the life sciences and facility environment and can help in the construction advice. It's a very cordial working relationship that I've been experiencing. So as we're looking at expansion now, and so that's part of the process and part of the attraction. So, and Ryan, to your point with the experience through Pfizer and with that, I think my expertise isn't in property, right? In real estate, I'm a scientist by training, and so most of what we do in the discovery space is really geared towards innovation and novelty. And I think you mentioned earlier the per capita NIH funding in the area. Those are ideas and concepts that are feeding companies like ours. That happens in other spaces as well. But you couple all these things together with the great options in terms of the buildings and the laboratory space you can set up and the flexibility to do that and not having to hunt. I have colleagues that are running companies up in the Boston area, and typically what they have to do is they have to move out, right? They have to move 30, 40, 60 miles outside of Boston in certain phases of the company's evolution just to be able to make it economically feasible. And so we have a lot more options here. And once we attract people, we have the ability to keep them. And so we recently hired our last two scientists who've been hired, PhD level scientists have come from over the last 6 weeks. One's come from Duke, so we're tapping into the local environment, and one's come from the Chicago area, top-notch institutions, and just thrilled to be in the Triangle area for quality of life and the balance that one gets there. So we compete very, very well at the upper echelons of the expertise, technical talent level, and then I think the area has a lot more things to offer, which are, I think, and from my perspective, are only getting better and better each year. So if I had to give you my opinion about what's driving that growth and expansion, that combination of factors is really it.
Okay. Kevin, let me bring you in. You've had a successful career as the head of global real estate for companies like MetLife and Syneos Health, and now with ParXL. You've been front and center in the discussions on choosing locations for offices. Can you give us a little bit of an insight on what the appealing factors of the Triangle were to the executives you have worked with in the past?
Sure, Ryan. And to go on to what you just said, so this is with a third company that I've been involved with over the last several years of bringing them into the Triangle with ParXL. So I'm waiting for my plaque, but it's easy to advocate for the area. Okay. And as Doug mentioned, it's really about that quality of life. And so I want to elaborate a bit about that. So it's Raleigh, Durham area that gives you a big city feel without the feel of a big city. All right. And I'll explain that just a little bit. So we have a robust arts and entertainment venues. You go from the art scene in Durham to you have the DPAC, you have Walnut Creek, you have the PNC Center. There's always something going on in the area year round. You can always find something for families, for singles, for any age group in the area. Constantly amazed at all the different activities that Raleigh Durham puts on the table. You have the professional teams. You have a great, very competitive hockey team with the Hurricanes. You have a spectacular venue with the Durham Bulls, for that type of aspect, and a host of others, as well as a very vibrant youth leagues throughout the areas, adult leagues throughout the area. Also, the quality of life reference of the diverse neighborhoods in the spectacular parks that the area has, and not to mention the fact that you have year-round climate, right? You can always find activities outdoors to supplement the indoor activities. The proximity that folks get with 2 hours to the beach, 2 hours you're in the mountains. It has venues for everyone that enjoys that type of activity. And then finally, the potential of the product, right? You have not only Class A product in the area, but you have the manufacturing, distribution opportunities, and you don't have to Doug's point, you don't have to go 30, 40, 50 miles outside of the area where your employees can have that work-life balance and still be able to have a decent opportunity to work close to where all the action is. So I think that those are all aspects that are appealing to companies.
All right, great. Well, let me bring Mike in. Mike, your company Grail, which is based in the Bay Area, California, just had a major announcement here in June that you were investing $100 million to build a state-of-the-art lab, office, and warehouse space right here in Durham. Obviously, this is a great opportunity for Durham and our region and our state, and it'll create about 400 jobs. Can you give us a little bit of the background on your dynamic company, and then give us a brief description of the site selection process you used that ultimately led you to Durham?
Yeah, sure, Ryan. And Kevin just reminded me that I need to get out and check out the area more. I'm kind of based here in RTP every time I come here, and I don't get out and explore enough when I'm here, so I need to do that a little more. So Grail is a life sciences company. It's 4 years old. It's, like I mentioned earlier, it's spun out of Illumina. Illumina discovered about 6 years ago that in doing some of their analysis, they were able to detect cancer signal in blood. And so they did some research on it, spent about a year doing research, and then decided they didn't want to do it themselves. They wanted to create a company. They didn't want to compete with their customers. And so they spun Grail out. Our mission's always been to detect cancer early when it can be cured. So the idea isn't we're going to cure cancer. The idea is we're going to find cancer earlier. You're going to detect it at stage 1 or stage 2 instead of find it when you get symptoms later on, stage 3 or stage 4, after it's had a chance to spread potentially. And so we've developed this test. We've been working for 4 years. We've developed a test. We're getting very close to launching a test. The test will be something you'll get, and it's not going to happen right away, right? But in the next few years, hopefully, you'll go to get a physical. They'll do a blood draw. They'll send your blood to Grail. Grail will process the test, and we'll tell you whether or not you have cancer, any one of 50 cancers, lung, breast, colon, 50 different cancers. And we'll also tell you where in your body that cancer originated. And so it has the potential to be a really big impact on the way we treat cancer, how we catch cancer, catch it locally. You can be much more successful in treating it. And so that's what we've been working in and developing, and that's what we're moving to RTP. We've got an R&D facility in Menlo Park, but we don't have much of a commercial lab there. We got a little commercial lab, but nowhere near enough to meet the demand that we expect once we launch the test. And so RTP site's going to be really focused on that. So it's really exciting. We're really excited about it. You might have seen there's some things in the news about an IPO, and then that went kind of sideways, and we were acquired by Illumina last week. So backed by Illumina. So some of us are going back to Illumina, it sounds like. So, but we're really excited about launching this test, and it's a really big opportunity. We've been working really hard. We've got a lot of really smart people in Menlo Park that have been working on this test, and we're really excited about launching it next year. In terms of RTP, we recognized about 18 months ago that we were going to blow through our lab in Menlo Park. We needed to find a new spot. We started off with no particular location in mind. We had a kind of a criteria we set up for how we wanted to score different locations, and we started with that. We engaged Newmark Knight Frank, their team, and they led the process. We started with 113 cities. We used the scorecard to narrow that down to 13 cities. We reviewed those cities and narrowed it down to 4. And then we went and did site visits with those 4 cities. We looked at properties, we looked at the market, and evaluated those 4, narrowed it down to 2, and then we negotiated with 2 incentives and so forth, looked at more properties, and really that's where RTP really stood out. Some of the criteria we used, Ryan, you asked about, really we had kind of 9, 10 really major criteria. Labor quality, not just PhDs and undergrads, but also community college people that can do a sessioning, roles in our lab don't require, a bachelor's degree. So wanted a broad, but good quality, but a broad kind of set of skills. Quantity, we need a number, to hire 400 people, you can't do that in a small location. So you got to have a certain quantity of scientists and engineers as well. Operating costs was another big factor, not, labor costs as well as electricity costs. We use a lot of electricity. Rent, as we talked about earlier, much more competitive than Bay Area or other places. So operating cost was a big one. Natural disasters, this is our lab. If this lab goes down, we can't perform these tests. And so, Bay Area with earthquakes is one reason why we knew that was not an option, as well as cost. But we want to look for a place without, a significant natural disaster risk. So that really stood out from RTP standpoint. A life sciences ecosystem. We didn't want to be the only life sciences company, and so we wanted to have an ecosystem that we could tap into, and RTP really stood out there as well. Incentives, I've kind of learned is something you have to have, but maybe doesn't set you apart. It's kind of, I'll talk about it maybe a little bit later, but it's important. You have to have them just to be on that short list of 13 or 4 that we had. You had to have the incentives there to get there. Logistics, although logistics with FedEx pretty much goes everywhere. That really wasn't a criteria that really helped us narrow it down. And then facility, we were really particular about the facility we want. So when we came and we narrowed it down, we really made sure, we also looked at facilities and made sure we were going to be able to find a building that worked for us from a footprint standpoint. Schedule, we're on a really tight schedule. We signed a lease in June. We've already started construction, and we're going to be in it in Q1. And so really, really tight time frame. The infrastructure, electrical, all the things we needed in the building, and then ability to expand the building was really important to us as well. The ability to, once we outgrow it, we expect to outgrow it not too far down the road. We can expand that building, not have to go find and build another lab somewhere else. So those are kind of the criteria we used, Ryan.
Okay, that's outstanding. Thank you so much for that. And clearly we're all super excited to have you here in the Triangle. So obviously that was a boom for our region, and we've had other great announcements lately. Grifols recently this summer, they're the largest employer in Johnston County. They just announced in June they were investing $356 million in their facility there for an expansion. Dennis Therapeutics, another California-based company, is setting up a gene therapy manufacturing facility down in Sanford. $110 million investment, 209 jobs. And then just recently, Eli Lilly announced they were investing $474 million when they bought the old GSK campus to build a manufacturing plant. So we've got a lot of good things going on. So Doug, let me bring you back into the conversation. I think it's safe to say we're having a lot of luck recently attracting great companies to the market. But once we get them here, it's important to keep them here. From an executive perspective, what are some of the factors that keep you here and allow for sustained growth?
Yeah, Ryan, I think we're going to cross over on some of the same themes here. You find once you get people here and they get to know the area, it's a fantastic place to live. I do think it's always in the end it comes down about how viable is the business, right? So I think when Mike's talking about having the spread of the type of talent, well-trained people out of school, whether it's community college programs that have a heavy focus towards the tech industry and life sciences industry, all the way through the graduate students that are coming out of some of these first top tier institutions that we have. I think that this is an ecosystem that really feeds things. From the executive level, these days executives live anywhere, right? So especially this year, right, we're doing these meetings virtually. So I think people find it as an anchor. It's such an easy place to get to. I've done things, when I was traveling more pre-COVID, used to be up. I could easily get to a meeting, a 9, 10 o'clock meeting for sure up in New York or Boston, anytime I needed to, which happened frequently, and then get back. So accessibility to some of the core markets and key markets, at least on the East Coast, is really critical. And Boston and New York are really critical hubs, for us as a business. But the RTP area is just a place where people really, and the Carolinas in general, a place where people really want to be and live for many of the reasons that we've talked about. The one thing also that's really important for our company, we're on the discovery side, and I think Kevin's company has kind of these foundational anchors in the CRO space, and Mike's company coming in is really a great opportunity to continue to expand in the space, in addition to the big projects you mentioned. Once you get folks, we retain talent. Icogen's been here for a long time. We've had many of our staff members, the majority stay, and we find it pretty easy to recruit people out of the Boston area. So all of those things factor together. From running your business from an executive perspective, there are a lot of things that you don't have to worry about once you get established in RTP that I think are more difficult in other places. I've been in Boston, and the joke is you can always get another job. You can park your car in the same space if you want to drive into Boston, or your bike, or whatever it is. So that kind of stability is one less thing you have to worry about with a talented workforce, and once you get folks. So I think we're all strong advocates for the area, and the trick is always to get people here, get them to experience it. And once you get that over that hump, I think people really love it and find it's just a wonderful place for a lot of reasons to run a business and grow a business.
Yeah, that's what we've experienced in our line of work too, is you got to get the people here. They got to come. You can go to their market, tell them how great it is until they come. But once they get here, they're excited to be here.
Ryan, just
yes,
if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
A couple anecdotes on that, right? And I'm certain that everybody that does a site review or does a review of coming into an area, obviously you ask for references that you can go and speak with, right? I mean, that's definitely something I've done with all three of my companies that have come into the area that I've been with. And it's very interesting. So 2 quick stories about that. The first story is that to get people into the area. So I won't say which city we brought these executives from, but just to say that there is a very prominent global recognized statue just outside. But when the executives came down and toured the area, the broker actually that was assisting us turned around in the van. We were carting them around in a van and said, "We apologize because right now it's a heavy traffic time in this commute between these locations we were going to." It was kind of about 4:30ish in the afternoon, and the one executive just quipped and said, "If this is your rush hour, sign me up." Okay, so because as what has been mentioned by others on this call, you could spend hours in a commute in some of these major cities, right? And then the second real quick story is that we sat down with some executives at a very prominent financial firm, which we wanted to get their feedback. They had moved several thousands of employees and jobs into the area. And then the one main executive comment that was made was, "Don't let them know about our secret, because we keep saying that we didn't really want to come down here, but we will never go back, because the factors of the life quality, what you get down here." The one executive actually said, "I've actually relocated my entire family, including my parents, down in the area because we love it so much." So that really speaks volumes to what the area has to offer.
Right. Well, let me stay with you, Kevin. Obviously, from a real estate perspective, there's a lot of people wondering how things are going to change long-term post-COVID. I know you're in charge of managing that aspect for Par Excel. So can you explain to us what the new office space will look like post-COVID?
Yeah, so we've been doing a lot of research on that, because as everyone has seen, there's varying opinions of the real estate market's going to tank. Everybody's going to work virtually. No one's going to go back to, companies need to take more space, so forth and so on. What we've seen in the market and what we are looking at as we deal with groups such as Hagersmith on a local aspect from an architectural standpoint, Gensler on a global aspect, is that we are moving or transitioning space, as are other companies, from an individualistic scenario, aka everyone has their office with their name on the door, or their workspace with their name on the workstation, to removing a lot of those individual spaces and creating team collaboration areas and going to more unassigned spaces. So the footprint is not necessarily changing to a significant degree. Obviously, there's always going to be right sizing, expansions, depending on which avenue you are within your growth strategy. But what we are seeing is that there's a need for switching from that singular mindset to more of a collaborative, because you're always still going to have customer facing interactions. You need to have the right state-of-the-art space to safely have those customer face-to-face interactions, because that's still going to occur. And you also have to have these teaming areas. groups will still need to come and get together and interact. No virtual platform will ever be able to replace that. So it's really more of a shift of how you're using your space versus the space you have, right?
Okay. Michael, let me bring you back in. What changes are you having to make at Grail, and how do you plan to address the safety and health of your employees long term?
Yeah, Ryan. So California is still pretty much in lockdown. It feels a little different when I come back out here as opposed to there. I just got my first haircut last week when the haircut place is open. My haircut in the picture at the front here was a COVID haircut my wife gave me. But so we did make big changes. So right when this happened, right, we recognized there are people in our lab that have to be there every day, and so we need to continue with our trials. We can't let off the gas or the company stops completely. So we recognize there are 40 or 50 people out of 400 that need to be in the lab. And so we immediately sent people home. I haven't been to the office since March 12th, and most of our company hasn't as well. And we don't have any plans to go back anytime soon. G&A, sales and marketing, some of the software engineers, those kinds of folks, they don't need to be in the office, and we have found a way to work and get all the work done that way. In the lab, they have to be there. And so part of the reason we sent people home was to keep them safe, but also to keep those people in the lab safe. And we didn't want to give people an option to come in and potentially, bring in COVID and infect somebody in the lab and then infect them. So we've been really careful to not let anybody in, and really try to do whatever we can. We have temperature every day. We've got COVID tests that we offer, quick turnaround. Anybody that travels, if you come out here, you can't come in the office for 2 weeks. After that, and then unless you take a COVID test. And so we've been really careful in terms of what we're doing here. We expect to be in our building in Q1, but we're going to be in such a, this building's built for us for like four or 5 years. And so we're going to be able to spread out in this building for the first year or so. After that, we're going to have to find ways to separate and do that in the lab, which is tricky, right? In a lab environment, it's different than office. You got to be there. But you've got to find ways to deal with this. Where hopefully by the time that we have to do that, there's a vaccine and we can take care of it. Right. But it's a big factor, and that's the reason why I'm still leading this project. One of them is because our facilities director can't go back and forth but he's got to run COVID in that program in Menlo Park. So, got it.
Doug, any other feedback from that question for y'all at Ike?
Yeah, just a follow-on to Mike. And so, we're a lab-based biotech, so we're already there in terms of needing people to work, and in our operation, our business really depends on folks in the lab. So we started very conservatively because, as you rightly pointed out, the safety of your staff and their families is really the number one priority always. So we did flex shifts, we did the things that everybody else is doing, no non-essential visitors. But I think the big change for us going forward is that our square footage requirement per per employee is really something we're looking at, and it probably has to go up. We have some policies where we don't allow group meetings on the site. We don't allow non-essential visitors. And so as a function of that, we've done things like take our conference room space and turn it into lab space and create sort of workstations for people where they individually can work without the traffic flow and such, and a lot of engineering and process changes that we didn't think about before. So staff has been exceptional in terms of their conscientious approach to being healthy. We require masks, all the personal hygiene procedures, temperature checks, when people come in. But we are looking for more space, Ryan. I think that's really the solution for us over the next year, and we're all hopeful that the vaccines come out and are effective and durable, still to be determined. And this may be an annual thing, like the flu vaccine, where you need a new one the next year. So we're looking at this from a bit of a long-term perspective, and I think the simple solution is get enough space and develop enough attention to your processes so people can generally operate and maintain social distancing and feel comfortable about what they're doing. And so that, we've made those changes now. And in fact, unlike California, Mike, in October, we're planning to go back to normal hours and stop our flex shifts because we think we've made enough engineering changes to allow people to work safely. And also the reason we're really doing it as well, that everyone's got to be safe, and we have to have that as the priority. But it's, for a biotech lab-based business, it's the most efficient way to run the business too. So if you can accomplish both those things, then that's the win for everybody.
All right.
Ryan, I'll jump in here as well. I think Longfellow's writing a white paper on laboratory design and post-COVID conditions, and we're not there yet with being ready to share that with the world. But at any given time in our portfolio, we build a lot of spec labs to meet that immediate need. I'm talking to three on the panel with three tenants here, so I'm sure you all would agree. But when you sit down at the table and they're like, "When do you need to move in?" Everybody's like, "Yesterday." And then you say, "Well, lab space takes like 9 months to build out." And so everybody, is a lot of times some of the smaller groups are in a panic. So we have a spec lab program. At any given time, we're building 100 to 200,000 square feet of labs across the U.S. And some of the things that we're doing now in small alterations, and I know there's a lot of architects and engineers on this call, is we're making destinations out of locations for sinks and fume hoods. And so, historically you put a sink in the island, you put a fume hood in the island, maybe at one side of the lab or the other side. But the problem with that is if someone's at a sink washing a beaker, they have multiple people walking behind them at any given time. If someone is at a fume hood, and of course that fume hood is pulling air through the sash, and people are walking by them, they're getting doused with whatever that person is exhaling. So, we're making small tactical changes even now in the designs that we're producing, like making, cubbies for fume hoods. So a person's not exposed to that person walking behind them, locating sinks on walls instead of in island benches. So I think we'll see some small changes like that as well. And, we're working through and trying to understand what some of those design changes will be with some of our in-house architects and project managers. But it's interesting to think about some of those more tactical items as far as lab design.
Neil, I'll stay with you. I was going to ask you about what you're seeing in terms of current trends that brokers and developers are using to try to attract tenants to the space as the Triangle becomes more competitive. Are there any other things that you're seeing right now from a trends that you can talk about?
So I'll talk kind of more globally about our market and then drill down on kind of what exactly we're doing. The most important trends are the ones that we've, that have fueled our success to date. So, being centrally located to 3 tier 1 universities is extremely important for mainly 3 reasons: NIH funding, talent, the production of talent for the region, but also the production of technology. And so we're so lucky to have NC State, UNC, and Duke, but we're also extremely fortunate to have other universities that are also pumping out very well-trained and educated folks. Durham Tech, some of these community colleges and other schools, have programs training lab techs. And so not every job needs to be a PhD. We need a lot of people filling beakers. And so that's so important. And I know, probably a lot of, Kevin and Michael and Doug's probably experienced that as they're seeking talent. But extremely important. But also the spinning out of technology is very important. As I look across our portfolio here, which is north of 2 million square feet now, probably 30 to 40% of our tenants are local, have roots in local technology that was spun out of universities. So extremely important. I think, we have space here. So developers and investors have taken advantage of the fact that we have space. Look at Parmer and what Carlin did with the old GlaxoSmithKline campus. Really incredible. They took, all of that vacancy, which was a real hit to our market when Glaxo decided to leave, and they've leased it back up to some really great groups, LabCorp, and, Glaxo took back some space, Shattuck Labs, and just sold to ARE, and now ARE controls that campus. And, Longfellow, we've bought 2 buildings, we're now, I guess, 5 buildings in Imperial Center, 2 of which were completely vacant when we bought them. And, one we immediately leased up, and the second we're under construction on right now and have a tremendous amount of activity. So there's a lot of opportunities from a space perspective. And as you think about the growth of the market, the market, every time we buy a 120,000 square foot building that used to be an office space or used to be owned by a company like Glaxo, and we put it into the market as an investor-owned asset, the market grows. So the market will take immediate hit on vacancy, but long-term, there's enough absorption to support those kind of acquisitions and that kind of lease up. And so we have the space to do it. We're running out of those kind of opportunities. I mean, we're looking under every rock as a lot of other investors are to try to find those gems. Being well located within the RTP is the most important thing. So that's important. I think we're enjoying a culture of innovation. And a lot of that's been fueled by groups like NC Biolabs locating in downtown Durham. It's been huge for us. They're 100% leased, have been producing companies that are leasing space in the RTP, and I'm sure that would like to be in downtown Durham, which the market in downtown Durham is 1% vacant in lab space. So there's just no availability. Longfellow's working to fix that problem now. We're going to be converting some lab space and putting it on the market in downtown. But that culture of innovation, when Glaxo pulled out, a lot of folks stayed behind and started their own companies. A lot of our tenants that we worked with had moved here from Philadelphia. And, to everything that the other guys are saying, is loved the region, loved being in this market, and didn't want to move back to wherever they came from. And so they started companies and stayed. So we've really enjoyed that culture. And then I think, as I think about what we're doing specifically to compete with other owners in the market, is it's all about amenities now. It's all about services. So everybody's, spending a lot of money on amenities and improving their buildings. Every campus we have across the country now has an amenity center. We have a program that we've started called Elevate. It's a kind of proprietary program, but it's a tenant services platform. It's like a concierge program, and there's people at every property that, will provide, services, entertainment, workouts, activities, all those things for our tenants. So it's both physical and programming, but that everybody's doing that now. You look at the Palmer campus, they have a treehouse conference room, and chipping greens and putting greens. So it's pretty amazing what people are doing.
Let me bring Kevin and Michael in to add on to that. From a tenant perspective, when you're choosing a location, what are some of the most important factors to go in where you choose to locate? Kevin, I'll start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. And Neil touched upon quite a few of those. It's really that quality of product, one, which is anywhere from Class A. You're going to have those folks that want the Class A opportunities, whether that's a campus scenario, whether it's a high rise or what have you in the city center, all the way to the opportunities for the distribution, manufacturing, lab space, what have you. So having that opportunity of looking for that quality of product, and as Neil pointed out, it's starting to get more scarce, which then you got to take a look at your investment opportunities, right, as to who's going to be making the next investment in the area. And then the second piece that's very important that he touched upon was the value proposition. It's not just give me a building, it's what are you providing with that building? What am I getting for my rental fee? A few of the things that Syneos Health looked at when we brought that company headquarters into the area was we put a putting green out front. It had outside Wi-Fi. We have an outside cafeteria seating area. It had a running trail accessible right outside the back door for employees that goes around the perimeter park area. All those aspects and amenities have to be a part of the employee experience. It's not just that it's a nice to have anymore. Employees are expecting that from companies when they go into a new company campus.
Okay. Mike, you want to add anything to that with your selection process?
Yeah, having just gone through it, I mean, specific to what we were looking for when we came, from a building standpoint, we really needed the right footprint. We looked at a number of buildings that were one level, a number that were 3-4 levels with elevators and things. And it's not a bunch of small labs. We're one big operating lab. And so having everything on one floor and being able to move with pallet jacks and forklifts and moving the product all around through the lab without having to go up and down elevators was really important for us. So finding the right footprint and being a flexible footprint. We didn't want something that was odd shaped that was going to cause a problem later. We're building out about 60% of the lab now and the other 40% later. And we don't know what the later looks like, right? We don't know. We haven't done this before. We don't have a product today. So we don't know what the other 40% is going to look like. So we wanted something that was going to be really flexible. We're going to build it now. We don't know how much warehouse space we need versus lab space. Some of those things we'll have to make decisions later. So we designed it for that flexibility. We can expand the lab. We can expand the warehouse. We can expand the office space into that second phase. But we needed that flexibility, and a big square box is really what helped us do that in the building we're in. Schedule was really important. I mentioned it earlier. We signed an LOI in May. We signed a lease in June. We finished design in July. We got permits in August, and we started construction 3 weeks ago. And we want to be in Q1 because that's what we need. And I can't be the reason why we can't, ship a test when we launch the product. So schedule was really, really important. And so we worked really hard to find a building that we could get into right away and really get that work started. And so we've been working really hard to keep that on track for Q1. The infrastructure there, power again was a big one. So we needed power. And then amenities was a big one as well. You're right. Kevin mentioned earlier, employees expect it. So a gym, a cafe, running trail, fields outside, all those kinds of things are really important for especially that younger generation, potentially that have time and really kind of like you said, expect that. Flexibility, I mentioned flexibility from phase 1 to phase 2 of our project and having that, but also I mentioned earlier that expansion, the ability to expand without having to build another, add on to this building. We can use the same warehouse, the same office. You're connected. You don't have to go to a different building or a different even campus somewhere else. So having that ability to expand 3, 4, 5 years down the road was really important to us, and a big reason why we picked the building we did.
All right. I want to switch gears for a moment, if y'all don't mind, and kind of talk economic development, something that's close to my heart. Most people know we're one of the top 5 life science markets in the country. Clearly, Boston's ground zero for the life sciences, but then you have the Bay Area, you have San Diego, and you have New Jersey to kind of round out. Those are the top 4. Then we're kind of considered the 5th largest market. When I look at the states we're competing against, the ones I just listed out, they're all in serious trouble from a fiscal standpoint. California's state debt's around 149 billion now. They have the highest personal income tax rate in the country, and they're talking about raising that even higher. The corporate tax rate in California is 8.8%, and they're also talking about raising taxes on private companies there as well. New Jersey is one of the most indebted states in the country. Their total debt's 215 billion. The governor just 2 weeks ago called for 1 billion in new taxes. And then Massachusetts state debt currently is around 75 billion. So a lot of issues in these other markets. We've been doing things to make our state more competitive. We lowered our corporate tax rate. We now have the lowest corporate tax rate in the country. Forbes magazine has listed North Carolina the best state for business the last 3 years in a row. So we're doing the things right. But we're still having a hard time competing with some of these bigger markets. And Doug, I know you've lived in Boston. So I want to start with you, start the question to you as someone who lived in Boston. What can we do as a region and as a state to become more attractive to both companies and talent? You touched on talent, being able to recruit talent down, but what else could we be doing to get even more companies and people to move here?
Yeah, maybe there's 2 parts to that. I think all those things that you mentioned are great, and they have to help, right? I mean, as this kind of evolves, and when someone's thinking about larger projects like Mike's been talking about, and this area is going to do fantastically well, I think, anyway, as we go forward. One of the things that we see, again, I work in a little bit different space in the earlier drug discovery space, the preclinical space, but I do think there's an opportunity with the blue chip investors and biotech companies. They spin up in a place like Boston. I'll just give you an example. We work with a number of these companies that, whether they're Third Rock companies or Blackstone or whomever, very, very well funded, but they're virtual. So the concept and the idea for the company, maybe the kernel's there, but what we're finding is to enable what they do, we can develop a very collaborative working relationship where a lot of the work that gets done and a lot of the expansion of the resources that have to happen to get that work done can come from a company like us in partnership with those groups. So I do think there's an opportunity. We have a healthy, investment group in this area as well. But those are massive funds up in the area. But I think we can pull, and once we do that, you see things like Icogen as an example, maybe pull something in. But once those groups get more familiar with the space, and we can introduce each other and show them the other resources that are available, they're more likely to access those because they get over that hump of it's got to be in my backyard, which is it doesn't anymore. What the life sciences is a global business, right? So I think there's a real opportunity, at least in the front end, to pull things in that way as well. And I think over time, anyone that's looking at expansion is going to, some of the factors you mentioned, Ryan, are going to really give them pause about continuing to try to do that in those markets. And then this area will just fare very well. There's more and more of the farm industry and the technology industry that seems to be outsourcing or moving to other partners for space too. The CRO market has grown and been very great in the Triangle area, but what we're seeing on the front end of that process, those new project ideas, new drug discovery that's going on, whether it's gene therapy, with something like Bamboo being acquired by Pfizer, or it's groups like us. We work with Roche Neuroscience, and they're based in Basel. So but we have multiple projects with them, and we're doing the whole project basically. So I think those things can begin to act as seeds perhaps on the front end of the biotech side, and pull these companies in and grow, and then expansion, whether it's diagnostics or manufacturing or other CRO work, once they're here, it's easier to link them with these other groups, and we have everything in the area to do this really, really well.
Mike, I was going to follow up with you and ask you to talk a little bit about what you're seeing in California from a business standpoint, but also we have a question. The question was, since you're fairly new to this market, but have a long history in life sciences in the Bay Area, what aspects of RTP, good and bad, do you see that contrast with California?
Sure. So in terms of cost and quality of labor and everything, I think it's really positive out here. I think there's two things maybe that make California or the Bay Area a little different still. And number one is the access to capital. We had to raise $2 billion to get to where we are today. And that network in the Bay Area is so extensive. There's so much money up there that's trying to find a home that especially these days, that being up there and having access to that market and being in the center of it, I think helps a lot in terms of the way we were able to raise money. And the number of PhDs. So our company right now in Menlo Park, I haven't seen a stat for maybe 9 months or so, but at 9 months ago, half of the people in our company had PhDs. And so the number of people with those degrees in the Bay Area, they flock to some of these places, and the Bay Area is one of them. But the people that get those graduate degrees, and we have a lot of Duke PhDs, we have a number of North Carolina PhDs. The number of people with that level of expertise, the people that were able to do this, right? I'm in finance. Half the things that we do, I don't understand as a company, but the people that can do that, the people that took us from seeing a little signal of cancer to be able to create a test and to be able to do all the machine learning and software engineering and all that, the people that were able to do that were in the Bay Area. And so I don't know enough yet about RTP to know if it exists here, but I know it exists there, and it doesn't exist anywhere that I've ever lived before I moved there, 8 years ago. And so I think that's a big one. I think it's a big reason why the R&D, like some of that innovation stays in some of those big cities, but after you get through that initial innovation, maybe it looks for a new home. Right. And that's kind of what Grail's doing. We know we need PhDs, and we know we need that here, but we need more of a broad skill set here than we needed when we started the company.
Okay. Kevin, let me ask you a question about for the future. What aspects do you believe the Triangle area needs to focus upon to continue to drive the growth here?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. So from a high-level macro area, some of the aspects that I think these gentlemen have been communicating relative to the area resonate. So there's three areas that I see. And the first one is continuing that investment in the product and the infrastructure, okay? The power grid, the high speed accessibility, having the right product in varying aspects. We've touched a lot about that aspect. Also having those investors that are willing to make the investment in the Raleigh area and to assist with companies that need the assistance, and to be able to work productively with those companies that are, you know, the major players in industry, regardless of whether it's life sciences or what have you. The second thing is, I believe truly that for Raleigh Durham to become the next, you know, major city, or to make that next leap, that there has to be some consideration or investment in a public transportation model. At some point in time, you are going to hit that critical level of where you just can't move everybody with a car. And there has to be some investment there to, because you got your sprawl, right? We already have the sprawl going on, which is fine. But in order to connect all those areas together, Wake Forest, Durham, Raleigh itself, there has to be some investment consideration from a public transportation aspect. And then the third piece is around education. So the Raleigh-Durham area is blessed with the fact that they have some of the best colleges around, period, bar none. With Duke, NC State, North Carolina, you know, and all the subsequent supporting tech schools and such that go around that. The area that I believe the city and just the entire area specifically needs to concentrate on is the K through 12. That is a significant concern from a lot of groups that are looking at the area. We don't rank very high there. And so that investment in that infrastructure for those growing families and support of individuals that want to come into the area to start a family, that's something that I believe really needs to have some focus in the near and long term.
Doug, Neil, y'all want to pipe in on that at all?
Yeah, so on that last point, you know, I moved here from San Diego, so you know, what I found when we moved here, thinking about the park as being the hub, I had a trouble figuring out which direction to go in, because there were so many great options for where you could live, and even Kevin at the time, I'm school choices. My kids are older now, and things like that. But I think the one thing we could do a better job of perhaps is leveraging each other's expertise and getting. I'm not sure exactly how to do this, because we have our networks and we do get together and push things out. I think a lot of that's driven maybe by the capital guys that Mike's mentioning in the Boston area or the Bay Area, to really have all these events that are going on where you really see where you can cross fertilize and drive innovation. So yeah, just a thought. I tend to focus more on the R&D side, right, than the infrastructure side. So those are things that come to mind for me. But I agree with what Kevin said.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to that. I mean, I won't dive in on the transportation piece, but I totally agree. Got to have something. Although I wonder now if we're better off just waiting for automated transportation. But it's something that we should have tackled a long time ago. It's tough to solve for because we are so sprawled. You know, we do have such sprawl, and I understand that. But it's a definitely limiting factor for our region. You know, if you look at like San Francisco, you know, everybody's locating around the commuter lines. Same thing in San Diego. You know, if you're, you know, in the Bay Area, if you're not near the Caltrain, everything is always how far are you from the Caltrain. And so, you know, we even have a park where we have a dedicated shuttle that shuttles people back and forth to the Caltrain. It's very important. You know, I'd say the VC, absolutely agree with the VC piece. You know, one of the biggest differences when we talk about startup tenants in our market versus, you know, in the Bay Area, for example, is every time you talk about the user, you talk about who the investor is. It's, you know, XYZ Bio, and they're a, you know, ABC company. And so it's a lot more conversation around, you know, or a link between the VC and the group. Then we talk about it here. And I think it's just because they're not here and they're not familiar. But if we could get more VCs, you know, focused in this region, that would be great. But I do think, you know, VCs are going to chase money and chase profit. And, you know, our startup tenants are growing here, and they're exiting, and there is profit to be made in this region. So I think that it'll happen. It just take time, but that is definitely a limiting factor.
Let me ask one more question, and I'll start with Mike, since y'all just went through this. I mean, obviously we talked about the large markets, the top 5, but in your process, Mike, give me an idea of some of the other up and coming areas in the United States that a group like ours should be worried about in the life sciences, other competitive markets.
Yeah, I guess you talked about kind of the top tier, the Bay Area and San Diego and Boston. I guess that some of the areas I see that kind of maybe are on the cusp or close is that Baltimore area, not Baltimore specifically, but I don't know, they are just west of Baltimore, I guess, where there's a large life sciences kind of community along one road there. I can't remember the name, but we went there as part of this process, but it was a quick trip. That kind of Bethesda area, off that side. So that's a big area. It seems like they're putting a lot of emphasis to try to go there. And then Houston was the other one that put the full court press on to try to get us to come there. And it was competitive, but it's really a medical community more than a life sciences, I guess. It's less research, less kind of diverse. It's much more medical. The biggest cancer center in the world, some of the biggest hospitals in the world. So it's really focused around that, and we didn't feel like we had that ecosystem that we have here. And so that was one of the factors that drove us to decide RTP versus Houston in the end. But
Doug, how about your opinion on that?
Yeah, well, in terms of other competitive areas, it's a little different for us. I mean, the company was founded by a North Carolina grad, so it has that organic roots to it, which you see that a lot with if someone starts a company here, they tend to have longevity, SAS or someplace like that, right, as they grow. But we have had, I think it's just getting that hook and that anchor here. Is my experience in other markets or what's happened is we did have groups that tried to move us. We had the history of the company. We had a long a collaboration with Pfizer, and it started in 2007, ended it in 2011 when they acquired the company. And through that process, we were part of the pain therapeutics unit, which was based in Cambridge, England. And so there was a serious discussion about moving us out of the area. So, I think the businesses, the pharma companies that we work with, and they're just going to go to where the best solution is for them. And ultimately, the talent pool that we have in the area, and once you get it stabilized, that's a strong incentive to stay. And so you're asking more of my questions about why that came or what was of it, other competitive. But I do feel once you get that kernel, once you get that innovative core of talent and obviously value, you have to build value in the assets that you have. There's a strong incentive to keep it together. And, if you can move things, but you usually lose people, you break it up, you do something else. So, from my perspective, where I come from, once you get that together, and having been through this multiple times with different organizations, as I said, now we're part of Ligand Pharmaceuticals, which is based in San Diego. Great company, very well funded, but this is where we are. So there's no intention to move the company. In fact, we're expanding in this space. So I think that's the secret for companies like us to compete with other geographies.
Yeah, and Ryan, I would just add to that New Jersey as well, that 287 corridor where you have Johnson & Johnson, you have, I think Roche is up in there, Pfizer, you have other groups up there as well, and they compete well for talent access and so forth. I think one of the challenges there is with other major city areas is that cost of living up in the Northeast.
All right. Neil, elaborate a little bit more on, you said, I believe, close to 30 to 40% of your tenants now are homegrown type companies. Talk about a little bit about the transition that you've seen over the last 10 years, especially with spin-outs from Duke and UNC and NC State, and what the market looks like now between big publicly traded pharma companies and pre-revenue startups in our market.
Yeah, I think we have a pretty healthy distribution of those companies. We have, I'm just going off the cuff, we probably have, 40% pre-revenue companies, 30% 30 to 40% of companies who are about to get a phase 3 approval or are, in the beginning stages of profitability, and 20 to 30% are, large cap, publicly traded, very, very healthy, profitable companies. So, and I think what I've seen is more startups in our market. I think that's, again, we're very fortunate to have so many universities producing talent, but technology. But I've noticed, just in the tenant, leasing reports that I review, weekly, it's a lot more startups and a lot of, we're developing a lot of spec lab space to meet that immediate demand, which is great for our market that we have so many of these new technologies spinning out and starting. I did pull some statistics that I thought I'd run through. A lot of the startup community is, directly correlated with things like NIH funding, the venture capital markets, et cetera. So I thought I'd mention a couple of stats. So 2020 NIH budget is $42 billion. That's a 7% increase over 2019, representing about $2.6 billion of an increase. So the government continues to be focused on funding these NIH dollars into the universities and adjacent research uses. And that just continues to fuel more and more startups. According to PitchBook, which is a software that we use, second quarter 2020 venture capital funding in the U.S.-based biopharma companies was the largest in the history of the industry, more than $6.4 billion. Let's see. There's been 27 life science IPOs in the first half of 2020, generating $4.8 billion. 70% of those continued to increase in value post IPO. And then from an FDA approval standpoint, the FDA is approving a lot more drugs than they have in the past. So far this year, the FDA has approved 40 new drugs or therapies. Last year, in 2019, they approved 48, 2018, 59. So we're on track to beat the 2019 approvals. So, with the money coming into the market or continuing to come into the market through the NIH program, with the venture funding continuing to pour in through COVID into these opportunities, with public markets supporting IPOs, and then continued support, through drug development and into profitability, and with approvals through the FDA, trending in a very positive direction. It's no secret why a lot of folks are wanting to start companies and grow those and take them through, the start to profit, in these ideas that they have. So, I don't know if that exactly answered your question, but I think it overall very healthy mix between, all the stages of these companies' growth. But continue to be excited about the startups in particular.
Well, great. All right, at this time, I'm going to turn it back over to Greg. I think he's got a few more questions people have submitted. And Greg, if you want to jump back in, I'm happy to turn it over to you.
Yeah. I'm not monitoring all of the Q&A that's coming in, so I'll turn that over to Amanda in a second to see if we have any. But one question I had for everybody, and the bulk of the conversation as it relates to life science and where companies in this market tend to gravitate to has always been centered around RTP, and that's moved. It's sprawled out a little bit up into Durham and around Morrisville, but really the main focus is right around that part of our market. NC State, though, has the Centennial campus. They've got a huge ag tech program. There is some life science and lab space on their campus, but outside of that, you really don't see it in other parts of our market. So I guess my question to anybody that has any input would be, what's it going to take for that some of the growth moving forward to reach the Raleigh market, or North Raleigh, or do we think it ever will? I mean, those, downtown is obviously government and banks and law firms and accounting firms, and you're starting to see a lot of tech companies that want to be in downtown Raleigh. North Raleigh has traditionally been known for professional services, but there's still I think a lot of growth opportunity, and with everything that's happening at NC State and the fact that ag tech is certainly a big part of the life science conversation. Do we think that there will be growth in in other parts of our market as it relates to life science moving forward? And if so, is it near term, or is it going to take a while? And what are the why hasn't it reached that point yet? I know that was a lot of questions, but just kind of high level, interested to get people's thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can start. I think Neil mentioned Durham, as an example of that it's very attractive in a lot of ways, and there's been a lot of interest. I mean, I guess from my chair, it seems like the high tech sector has really been driving so much, and I think of my son worked at a company down in Durham, and I think if someone was coming in as a younger person in that space, that's where they would want to live. So, Greg, to your question about Raleigh, it may just be a temporal thing, but I do think it is. There's a real pull to the central nature of what's done in the RTP area as well, and so because of all these other things we talked about, the quality of life in the region and where you can go, your options. You can go on the compass any direction and have whatever type of lifestyle and in the environment you want to live in. So I don't know. I think it would be challenging, honestly, in the near term. But it just takes an anchor. It just takes some company, some group to start that space if that's really something that the region and Raleigh really wants to drive. But they would do just as well with the tech sector driving that if that's what's really coming in now. And that's where I've seen so much growth in the Durham Raleigh area recently. So just my thoughts.
And I think you see a centralization of that, somewhat tied to your accessibility of transportation as well as far as from the RDU, right? We all have global presences or large footprints, and we have operations that need to access back and forth. And so I think until you see a total saturation in that centralized point aspect, and there are considerations to have. We quite frankly, we looked at the area around the NC State campus that you mentioned, and it was on the short list. It did make the short list of our opportunities, but at the end of the day, we just felt that having that greater access to the RDU, the amenities that were offered over near to the RTP in Perimeter Park, and the access of talent and so forth, that made our ultimate decision. But I think that companies are beginning to expand their search and their criteria and taking a look at those other areas. And into Doug's point, I think it just takes one or two of those companies that make that stake in the ground, and then you'll see a migration there.
I think I would just add to that, Greg, to your question. There was a statistic in the 2019 JLL Life Science Report, and I believe I'm getting this right. 85% of all life science companies choose their location based on adjacency to research institutions and adjacencies to other research companies. So only 15% make a decision based on another factor. So that's part of the reason why people continue to pay $100 rents in Boston, right? And so I think that the Wake County, or in particular the Raleigh kind of Centennial campus, I think it's a matter. I do agree it's a matter of time, but I think it's a matter of deciding where in Raleigh are we going to have this life science hub. I mean, there's a reason that Michael decided to go in the center of RTP with the facility, that you could have gone to Holly Springs and gotten for $4 a foot. And it was a very intentional decision to I'm assuming it was a very intentional decision to co-locate around other institutional research groups, and also to be, for the talent attraction. Downtown Raleigh, I think, does have an opportunity. It has historically been the professional services and government center. But Centennial Campus, I think, could be amazing. It's just always hard to transact with public universities. Duke and downtown Durham, have created an opportunity because Duke can act quickly and make decisions about, leasing 400,000 to 500,000 square feet of lab space over the last, 5 years. And they have 1 million square feet of office space in downtown Durham that they lease. So, they have an opportunity to act quickly and to lease space. Public universities move a little slower, but I do think Centennial Campus is an awesome opportunity. It's a matter of getting a critical mass of groups, of research groups there, and operating and finding developers to build the space and to lease it out. So there have been a couple buildings. The ones on Centennial Campus just sold, and the numbers are pretty staggering. So it's obviously a success if you can build a building and lease it on the campus, financially from a developer standpoint. But there's just not a lot. There's not a lot of opportunity. If there was 1 million square feet on Centennial Campus, I don't think it'd be enough. And so, but hopefully that will develop, because I do think it'll be a great diversification for our market to have multiple kind of CBD options.
Yeah, I'll add, Neil, I think you're right. It is a big factor having other life sciences companies around when you choose that location, especially if it's your first location in an area. You definitely want to have that there. And we looked at it, right? That ecosystem I talked about. One big factor, and I came here, we looked at properties. I didn't really know what county we were in or where we're at. I just looking for the right building. But the Durham Chamber of Commerce and the NC Biotech played a huge role, and they were involved from the get-go, right? When we came to look at locations, they were there to tell us what they're going to do to help us and how they're going to help us along. That played a factor, right? When we got into deciding Houston or here and looking at other locations, they were on it. They made a lot of promises, and you weren't always sure if they would keep them after you signed up, but they actually have. They followed through with everything. They helped us. We're starting to hire people now, and they're playing a big role in helping us connect to alumni groups and do job fairs and things like that. And that's a really strong ecosystem in Durham County and for RTP that we're leveraging heavily.
Great. Very, very interesting. We've got probably time for one other question that I got here from the group. So again, feel free, anybody that feels inclined to answer this. So the question was, the panel shared a lot of market attributes driving growth of this sector in RDU. What constraints do you see to continued growth that public and private industry leaders need to take on? So what constraints to the growth do we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think I answered a little bit of this earlier in the presentation with the fact of investment in our education system, the lower education system, in my opinion anyway, the public transportation, and the infrastructure aspects. I mean, those are all things that I think that are long term, as some of the panelists provided insight. You don't change a lot of that overnight, right? But in order for us to make that next step to be, for the future, and I'm talking, 5-10 years, which is definitely down the road. But if you got to start those projects now, or in the very near future, to plan for that growth down the road. And I think that's one of the areas that, the public groups, even the private sector, they have to start thinking proactively over the next decade plus as to where are we going, because of at some point in time, the growth, it will be questioned if we don't keep up the infrastructure, if there's not a plan in place to keep up those type of aspects around the infrastructure and those services.
Yeah, I agree with Kevin, but by the time you feel like you really need that infrastructure, it's too late.
It's too late.
Yeah.
And you missed the boat. Also, it's good to design it now so that you can build living around it, right? You don't want to just have train stations around. You want to have housing. You want to have hotels nearby. You want to have it so that people don't have to have a car. If they come here to visit, like I am, or if they're, if they live here, they can get to and from. You also have to build networks off that, right? You can't have a train going everywhere, so you got to build bus networks and things like that around it. But it's going to be a big deal. The Bay Area is way behind, even with BART and Caltrain. It's still heavy lifting to get to and from, and
Right. It's a constant
doesn't cover-
battle, right?
Yep.
Yeah, Greg, the last thing I would add, I mean, it's on the private side, and I don't have the answer to how to do this, but more capital to invest. I mean, usually the funds that are available, they're an order of magnitude larger in some of these other markets that we're talking about, at least. So, if there's a way that, we can work to attract more of that, or work together with that, maybe that's a better way to think about it. I think that would add value to the area.
Sure. Great. Well, we had a number of questions coming in, and as I was looking at them, I think you guys we've covered a lot of ground here, and I think we hit on a lot of the answers to these questions. So, and we're running up on our stop time here. So, unless anybody has anything else to add, really appreciate the panelists. I think this was some really great perspectives from different angles and different experiences as it relates to our market and where we're coming from and where we're going. So really appreciate everybody's time today. A quick reminder, all of these virtual events with Cornet, they are recorded, so there should be they should post the recording on the website if anybody wanted to share it with somebody that wasn't able to attend today, or go back and hear something that you found interesting. So thank you again to Ryan for assisting with moderating the discussion today, and with Michael, Neil, Kevin, and Doug. We really appreciate the time. This has been fantastic. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Happy to be here.
Thanks, everybody. Y'all have a good weekend.
Thanks.
Bye-bye, you
Cheers.
too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.